Have you ever wondered why some women seem to awaken a man's deepest hunger for closeness without uttering a word, while others exhaust themselves trying, only to be met with indifference? Most people believe desire is born from beauty, from charm, from effort. But the truth is far more paradoxical. What you think will secure his love often binds him tighter to his defenses, while what you fear may distance him is what actually draws him near. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious speaks in symbols, that longing itself is not for the surface but for the hidden. And in the dance between man and woman, it is often the unseen, the mystery, the restraint, the rootedness, that ignites his most primal yearning. To understand this is to see that attraction is never just about chemistry or coincidence. It is a mirror of archetypes, the hero and the muse, the king and the queen, the wanderer and the flame that guides him home. A man's longing is not for the woman who bends herself to his will, but for the one who reminds him of what he is missing within his own soul. He does not crave what is easy or predictable, he craves what unsettles him in just the right way, what cracks the armor of his ego and forces him into presence. The paradox lies here: when you try to please, he forgets you; when you stand unshaken, he feels you in the marrow of his being. Think of this in the language of shadows. Every man carries within him an unspoken split, the part he shows the world and the part he hides even from himself. He projects onto women the lost fragments of his own psyche, his tenderness, his vulnerability, his longing for meaning. Most women, unknowing, collapse under the weight of this projection, trying to fulfill the impossible ideal. But the empowered woman does not. She recognizes that his longing is not really for her, it is for himself, refracted through her presence. And because she understands this, she never loses herself in the role he casts. She embodies her own axis, her own inner world, and from this rootedness his deepest longing awakens, because it cannot consume her. This is where you must ask yourself, what truly pulls a man toward you? Is it your effort, or your essence? Imagine this: he has seen countless women compete for his attention, molding themselves into shapes they believe will please him. But then he encounters one who does not play the game. She listens, yes, but without desperation. She gives, but never more than she chooses. Her eyes hold both warmth and distance, an invitation and a boundary. In her presence, he feels both safe and unsettled, both welcomed and challenged. This is the alchemy of longing, when his unconscious senses that she is not a possession, but a mirror of something he has yet to claim within himself. It is here that Jung's insight into individuation becomes vital. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, of uniting the conscious with the unconscious, of integrating what was lost. A man may resist this journey on his own, but through the presence of a woman who refuses to dissolve into his expectations, he is compelled toward it. She awakens the tension he cannot ignore, his hunger to conquer meets her refusal to be conquered. His need to possess collides with her essence that cannot be owned. In this friction, his longing is sharpened, because it is no longer about desire as conquest, it becomes desire as transformation. And you, if you have ever wondered why giving everything only left you empty, why chasing only left you unseen, this is why. You were feeding his ego, not his soul. The man's deepest longing is not satisfied by indulgence but by initiation. He is not moved by the woman who abandons herself for him, but by the one who forces him, silently, to confront what he fears most, his own incompleteness. And in that confrontation, he finds himself aching for her, not because she completes him, but because she refuses to. Desire deepens not in the presence of certainty but in the presence of tension. A man does not ache for what he fully possesses, he aches for what forever escapes his grasp while still remaining close enough to feel. This is the paradox that ignites his deepest longing, the nearness of a woman who is present but not consumed, loving yet not enslaved, tender yet immovable. When she stands rooted in her own essence, she becomes like the moon reflected in water, visible, luminous, and profoundly real, yet never something he can trap in his hands. He is forced to look, to marvel, to reach, to be transformed by the mystery rather than the possession. In psychological terms, this tension awakens the archetype of the seeker within him. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine image within a man's unconscious that guides him toward wholeness. When he encounters a woman who embodies this image with depth and presence, he feels the stirring of something ancient, something beyond surface attraction. But here is the danger: if she collapses into trying to become the anima he projects onto her, she loses her essence and becomes an illusion. His longing dissipates, because the projection cannot endure without her rootedness in her own reality. She must stand apart from the image, even as she reflects it, or else the spell breaks. This is why the woman who does not chase becomes unforgettable. She is not withholding love out of cruelty, nor playing tricks to appear distant. She is simply anchored in her own being, and that anchored presence creates the very scarcity that keeps his soul restless in her direction. He feels that she does not need him to validate her worth, and this shakes him. It awakens an insecurity, a hunger, a desire to rise. Men do not speak of this often, but within the silence of their hearts, they long for a woman who unsettles them just enough to call forth their own dormant strength. Not through drama, not through games, but through the quiet radiance of her self-possession. Consider the rhythm of intimacy: too much pursuit, and the thread of desire snaps. Too much distance, and the bond dissolves into emptiness. What creates longing is the dance of closeness and space, presence and mystery. A woman who understands this intuitively is like a conductor of unseen music. She offers moments of softness where he can rest, but she also offers silence, where he must listen to himself. She knows that her role is not to fill his emptiness but to let him feel it, so that he may rise toward it. This balance, of giving without losing, of withholding without rejecting, is the fine art that triggers his unconscious longing. And here, the wisdom of the Stoics aligns with Jung. Seneca wrote that true love is not about possession but about freedom, that one must learn to delight in what cannot be chained. Marcus Aurelius reflected that desire itself becomes corrupt when it seeks ownership. In the same way, a man's longing transforms when he realizes he cannot cage the woman he adores. She is with him, yes, but only by choice, never by necessity. This realization awakens his deepest hunger, because it forces him to confront the fragility of his own grasp. Desire is no longer a conquest, it becomes devotion. Now turn this question inward: are you willing to be that woman, the one who holds herself with such depth that no man can consume her, yet every man feels her presence like fire? It is not about withholding affection, nor about pretending to be untouchable. It is about remembering that your essence is not negotiable. When you embody this truth, you trigger not just his longing, but his transformation. For in you he sees both what he craves and what he cannot conquer, the reflection of his own unfinished soul. And that is the kind of longing that endures beyond the fleeting spark of attraction. Longing sharpens in the space where a man collides with his own limitations. When he looks at a woman who remains rooted in herself, who does not dissolve into the pull of his expectations, he is forced to recognize that what he desires cannot be demanded, only invited. This is the quiet agony of true attraction: he sees before him the possibility of something greater, yet he cannot bend it to his will. And so the longing deepens, not because she withholds, but because she exists beyond the grasp of his ego. She reminds him of the eternal truth: what is most valuable can never be possessed, only experienced. The archetype that awakens here is not the seeker but the warrior. Every man carries within him a buried hunger to prove himself, not to the world, but to the unyielding mirror of the feminine. When she is fully sovereign, his instinct is ignited, not to dominate, but to rise. He longs to meet her where she stands, to be deemed worthy of her presence. Yet, paradoxically, she has no test for him, no trial to offer. The test lies within himself. She is simply the flame before which he must learn to endure his own shadows, his own inadequacy, his own need for growth. Her stillness, her refusal to collapse, calls forth in him a courage he did not know he possessed. But consider what happens when she does collapse, when she gives too much too quickly. The fire dims. The mystery dissolves. The longing evaporates into comfort. And though comfort has its place, it does not awaken the marrow-deep ache that draws him into devotion. That ache is born only when he senses that she remains slightly beyond him, not unreachable, but not surrendered into his possession either. She is there, but not contained. Present, but not dependent. This is the paradox of feminine power. It awakens his devotion precisely because it cannot be consumed. Jung spoke of the shadow as the unseen reservoir of all that is denied, feared, or disowned. For men, the shadow often holds their vulnerability, their tenderness, their longing for connection. When a woman refuses to play small to soothe him, she forces these shadows to rise to the surface. He may resist, he may even fight against it, but deep within, something stirs. He feels both the terror of exposure and the ecstasy of recognition. His deepest longing is not for a woman who mirrors his strength, but for one who can contain his weakness without drowning in it. She becomes the vessel in which he confronts himself, and in that confrontation, he becomes bound to her, not by chains, but by awe. And yet, this bond is fragile. If she seeks control, if she manipulates, if she pretends mystery while secretly empty inside, the spell shatters. His unconscious is not fooled for long. What holds his longing is not performance but presence, not tactics but truth. She must live from her own rootedness, or else his hunger will fade as quickly as it arose. The paradox is that the less she tries to make him stay, the more his soul is compelled to return. He longs not for her body alone, but for the echo of himself he finds in her presence, the echo that demands he grow. Ask yourself, how many times have you given everything, only to be left with nothing? How many times did you believe that love would be secured through sacrifice, only to discover that sacrifice erodes desire? The truth is stark, a man's deepest longing awakens not when you give yourself away, but when you remain whole. He does not ache for the woman who empties herself to fill him, he aches for the one who stands sovereign, who allows him to face his hunger without relieving it too soon. And in that hunger, he finds not only his desire for her, but his desire for himself, for the man he longs to become. What unsettles him most is not your silence or your absence, but the quiet certainty that you are whole without him. This realization destabilizes the foundation of his ego, for the male psyche often assumes that love is secured through ownership. Yet when faced with a woman who is luminous in her independence, he is forced to reconcile with a deeper truth: she chooses, and her choice is never born of need, but of alignment. In this moment, his longing is no longer for conquest but for communion. He does not crave to capture her, he craves to be chosen by her, again and again, because she could walk away at any moment, and still she remains. This dynamic awakens the archetype of the king within him. The immature man seeks to dominate, to claim, to control. But the king archetype longs to rule with integrity, to be seen as worthy by one who cannot be deceived. When a woman stands in her sovereignty, she does not inflate his illusions, nor does she flatter his ego. Instead, she demands, wordlessly, that he rise to meet her at the level of truth. Her gaze cuts through pretense, her energy tolerates no mediocrity. And though this may terrify him, it also awakens in him a sacred ache, the desire to ascend into the man she already senses he could become. He longs for her not simply as a lover, but as a mirror of his own unfulfilled potential. But beware the shadow side of this dance. Many men, when confronted with such a woman, will retreat. They may accuse her of being too much, too independent, too demanding. These are not judgments of her essence but confessions of their fear. They fear the mirror she holds, because it reflects the fractures within themselves. They fear that to be with her, they must leave behind the boyhood comfort of being worshipped without effort. In truth, their longing burns all the same, it simply hides beneath layers of avoidance, because to feel it is to confront their own inadequacy. The empowered woman does not chase these men, nor does she dim her flame to soothe them. She lets them go, knowing that only the one who is willing to rise will endure the fire of her presence. This is why longing and respect are inseparable. A man cannot truly long for what he does not also revere. Lust without reverence fades, obsession without respect curdles into resentment. But when he senses that her essence is both beyond his control and deeply attuned to her own worth, his desire transforms. It ceases to be about taking and becomes about earning, about showing up, about becoming a vessel strong enough to hold what she offers without breaking. In this, longing becomes devotion, and devotion becomes transformation. She does not need to instruct him, nor correct him, her very being calls forth this evolution. And here lies the deeper paradox, the more she leans into her own completeness, the more he feels incomplete without her. It is not a need she plants in him, but a revelation he encounters through her presence. She awakens in him the longing to know himself more deeply, because through her he tastes the possibility of wholeness. He begins to sense that his life, no matter how accomplished or outwardly successful, lacks something essential, something she carries not because she gives it, but because she lives it. And so he returns, again and again, drawn not by dependency, but by the sacred ache she ignites within his soul. Ask yourself, do you dare to embody this power? To walk into love without clinging, to hold space without collapsing, to let his longing grow not through manipulation but through your very refusal to betray yourself. For the woman who stands in this truth triggers not just a man's desire, but his destiny. And it is this rare alchemy that separates fleeting attraction from a devotion that endures the test of time. Longing deepens when absence of need becomes presence of power. The man looks upon the woman who does not barter her soul for his affection and finds himself disarmed. He has known the pursuit of those who gave too quickly, who bent themselves into fragments to win a moment of his approval. That kind of desire dies swiftly, consumed like dry tinder. But the woman who carries herself as a flame that cannot be dimmed, even if he turns away, awakens a different hunger. In her self-containment, she holds a secret he cannot touch, and it gnaws at him. He wants to know it. He wants to deserve it. He longs to draw near, not because she withholds, but because she remains untouchably whole. This is the point at which his unconscious confronts the archetype of the lover. Not the shallow lover who seeks pleasure as escape, but the sacred lover who yearns for union beyond flesh. The empowered woman evokes this by refusing to be reduced to utility. She does not soothe his loneliness by sacrificing her boundaries. She does not validate his worth by diminishing her own. Instead, she insists, silently, that love is not an escape from the self but a mirror of it. In her arms, he feels the sweetness of belonging, but only when he comes to her as he is, not as the mask he wears for the world. This is why his longing grows. She does not fall for the mask, and therefore he aches to be seen as the man behind it. Here, too, arises the power of mystery. Not the artificial kind, born of tactics and delay, but the natural mystery of a woman who is still a universe unto herself. A man may touch her body, but he will never exhaust the depths of her being. Each time he draws near, he finds another layer, another truth, another contradiction that unsettles him in the most intoxicating way. She is both softness and steel, both comfort and storm. He cannot map her, cannot own her, cannot reduce her to a single image. And so his longing is endless, because she remains infinite. This infinity is not performance, it is the natural result of a woman who has not abandoned herself in order to be loved. But this kind of presence requires courage. Many women are tempted to collapse into roles, the nurturer who gives until she is hollow, the temptress who entices but hides her heart, the caretaker who makes herself indispensable. Each of these may secure temporary attachment, but they do not awaken lasting longing. True longing arises only in the presence of wholeness. It requires a woman to stand in the discomfort of being misunderstood, to endure accusations of coldness or pride, to refuse the false comfort of shrinking. Yet in this refusal, she becomes unforgettable. Even men who leave her orbit will carry the echo of her essence, the haunting sense that they brushed against something sacred and lost it. And so his psyche is split between resistance and surrender. Part of him wants to flee, to seek easier comfort elsewhere. Another part of him aches to remain, to be worthy, to rise into the man who can meet her at her depth. This inner split is the crucible of his growth. If he flees, it is because he cannot yet bear the weight of his own shadows. If he stays, it is because his longing for her has become indistinguishable from his longing for wholeness. The empowered woman does not force the choice. She allows him the dignity of his path. She knows that her role is not to make him ready but to remain ready within herself. And here, perhaps, you must ask yourself, are you willing to let his longing live and breathe without rushing to soothe it? Are you willing to trust that your self-possession is the very catalyst his soul requires? For the truth is this, he does not truly long for your body, your approval, or your constant giving. He longs for the mystery of your wholeness, for the presence of a woman who cannot be erased, who reminds him of the part of himself he has not yet found. A man's deepest longing awakens in the tension between what he desires and what he fears. He desires closeness, yet fears being consumed. He longs for a woman's warmth, yet fears losing himself in her embrace. He wants the safety of love, yet trembles before the vulnerability it demands. Most women, unaware of this paradox, rush to soothe these fears, believing that by softening themselves, by erasing their boundaries, they will earn his trust. But in truth, what eases his fear does not intensify his longing. What sharpens longing is the woman who can stand in the fire of his fear without collapsing into it, who allows him to face his own conflict while remaining unshaken in her essence. This is where Jung's concept of individuation pierces the heart of desire. Individuation is the process of uniting the conscious with the unconscious, the light with the shadow. In love, this process is not gentle, it is disruptive. When a man encounters a woman who embodies her wholeness, he is confronted with the parts of himself he has disowned. Her independence reminds him of his dependency. Her calm unsettles his restlessness. Her self-worth exposes his fragility. And though his ego resists, his soul aches. This ache is longing. It is the pull of the unconscious toward growth, disguised as desire for another. Yet how easily this dynamic is lost when she abandons herself. If she becomes the healer who overnurtures, he does not have to face his wounds. If she becomes the servant who meets every need, he does not have to step into responsibility. If she becomes the mirror who reflects only his strengths, he never sees his shadows. In each of these, his longing fades, for longing is never for comfort, it is for transformation. The empowered woman holds steady in her truth, and by doing so, she invites him to confront his His soul remembers her not as a fleeting pleasure, but as the axis around which his own evolution began to turn. This is why longing often frightens him. It is not simply attraction, it is revelation. To long for her is to admit he is incomplete. To crave her presence is to acknowledge that his strength is not enough without vulnerability, that his power is hollow without intimacy. Longing humbles him. And for many men, this humility feels unbearable. They may retreat, deflect, even scorn the very woman who stirred them, not because she is unworthy, but because she revealed too much truth too soon. The woman who understands this does not chase after the retreating man. She lets him go, not out of indifference, but out of wisdom, knowing that longing unfulfilled will carve deeper channels in his soul than comfort ever could. But for the man who stays, the journey changes him. Her presence becomes a mirror in which he sees both his weakness and his possibility. He begins to long not only for her touch but for the man he feels himself becoming in her presence. This is the subtle alchemy of true attraction. It is never about the woman bending herself to fit his life. It is about her standing so firmly in her truth that his life bends toward growth. His longing becomes devotion not because she demanded it, but because his soul demanded it of him. And you, if you step into this truth, will see how the dynamic shifts. You will no longer beg for affection, no longer strategize for attention, no longer fear being forgotten. Instead, you will embody the very essence that cannot be forgotten. For the man who brushes against your wholeness may resist, may retreat, but he will never erase the memory. And the one who is ready will remain, bound not by chains, but by the sacred ache of longing that only deepens with time. The paradox of longing is that it thrives not in possession, but in the subtle presence of loss. A man's heart beats faster not when he knows he owns you, but when he realizes he never truly can. The woman who embodies her sovereignty reminds him that she is here by choice, not by necessity, and that choice may change at any moment. This impermanence terrifies him, yet it also binds him more deeply than certainty ever could. For certainty lulls desire to sleep, but the trembling awareness that she could walk away, yet stays, awakens devotion. In this fragile tension, his unconscious reaches for what it has always feared, surrender. The masculine ego clings to control, to conquest, to proof of dominance. But before the presence of a woman who cannot be conquered, control dissolves. He is left exposed, vulnerable, uncertain. It is here that the archetype of the pilgrim awakens within him. She becomes not a possession, but a path, a living mystery he feels compelled to walk. Each interaction is a threshold, each silence a riddle, each glance an initiation. Longing is no longer a hunger of the body alone, it becomes a spiritual ache, a call toward union that is as much about his soul as it is about her presence. But this ache is only sustained when she refuses to betray herself. The moment she abandons her boundaries, when she trades her sovereignty for reassurance, longing collapses. He feels it instantly, though he may not name it, the fire dims, the air thins, the tension vanishes. She has given away the very essence that stirred his unconscious. And so he drifts, restless, seeking again that which unsettles him, that which calls him higher. The empowered woman understands this. She does not trade her truth for temporary closeness. She knows that the ache of his longing is not cruelty, but the soil in which devotion is born. It is here that philosophy and psychology converge. Epictetus taught that freedom lies not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. Jung revealed that love is the meeting place of two individuations, not the collapse of one into the other. Together, these truths unveil why longing is sacred. It forces both man and woman to stand whole, to meet as equals, to choose without chains. When she embodies this, his desire is stripped of illusion. He no longer seeks her to fill a void, but to face it. He no longer craves her as possession, but as revelation. She becomes the reminder that love is not about losing oneself in another, but about finding the courage to become more fully oneself through the encounter. Ask yourself, how often have you tried to soothe a man's insecurity with your sacrifice? How often have you given more, spoken softer, tried harder, only to feel him drift further away? This is no accident. His soul does not long for what costs you yourself, it longs for what compels him to rise. He may not admit it, he may not even understand it, but his deepest longing is not for your submission, it is for the mirror of your sovereignty. And when you live as that mirror, you need not chase. His own unconscious does the chasing, driven by the ache he cannot silence. For what he truly craves is not endless comfort, nor blind adoration, nor easy love. He craves the sacred tension of a woman who is fully herself, who welcomes him yet remains free, who loves deeply yet never loses her axis. In her presence, his longing will never die, because she can never be reduced to something he owns. She is mystery incarnate, and mystery is the only flame that never fades. Longing becomes the crucible where a man's illusions are shattered and his truest desires revealed. He enters thinking he wants beauty, charm, perhaps compliance, something that reflects well upon him, something he can hold and display. Yet before a woman who stands sovereign, who radiates both intimacy and untouchability, he begins to realize his hunger runs deeper. She is not a trophy to validate his worth, but a living reminder of the worth he has yet to claim within himself. Her presence forces him to abandon the shallow comforts of possession and enter the terrifying terrain of transformation. Here, his unconscious wrestles with two opposing currents, the urge to retreat into control, and the ache to surrender into devotion. This conflict is what keeps his longing alive. If he could fully control her, his desire would vanish. If he were completely certain of her, his hunger would fade. It is precisely her unpredictability, her refusal to conform, her insistence on remaining whole, that fans the flames of his yearning. He cannot pin her down, because she is not performing. She is not enacting strategy, she is living her truth. And it is this truth, this essence untainted by games, that shakes him more than any trick or tactic ever could. The empowered woman understands that longing is not sustained by absence, but by depth. She does not vanish to create artificial mystery, she becomes mysterious by being endlessly herself. She does not withhold affection as punishment, she offers affection freely, yet never at the expense of her own integrity. She knows that her soul is not a currency to be spent, but a temple to be honored. And in this honoring, she creates a space where his longing transforms from the hunger of the ego into the devotion of the soul. He aches not simply for her touch, but for the man he is in her presence, expanded, deepened, awakened. Jung taught that the anima, the feminine within a man's psyche, is both guide and tormentor. It is the image that calls him toward wholeness, yet it also confronts him with what he lacks. When he projects this image onto a woman, he feels both intoxicated and unsettled. Most women collapse beneath this weight, mistaking it for love, carrying his projections until they vanish under the burden. But the sovereign woman does not. She reflects the anima back to him without dissolving into it. She allows him to feel the torment of his longing, to sense the gap between who he is and who he could be, without rescuing him from it. And so his longing deepens, not for her as a savior, but for her as a sacred mirror. This mirror terrifies him. To long for her is to admit his incompleteness. To desire her presence is to confess his own dependency. Yet this terror is also his path. In her presence, he cannot remain stagnant. He must either rise or retreat, evolve or escape. The woman who understands this no longer fears his retreat. She knows that to chase him is to rob him of his own becoming. If he withdraws, it is because the fire was too much for him to bear. If he stays, it is because his longing has become inseparable from his destiny. In either case, her essence remains untarnished, her sovereignty untouched. And so the truth becomes undeniable: what triggers a man's deepest longing is not sacrifice, not strategy, not performance. It is the rare presence of a woman who lives in such alignment with herself that no man can consume her. He longs not because she withholds, but because she reveals a love that cannot be demanded. He longs not because she plays games, but because she refuses to betray her essence. In her, he sees both the wound of his incompleteness and the promise of his wholeness. And so he aches, not to own her, but to meet her. Longing, when it reaches its purest form, ceases to be about desire alone and becomes about transcendence. The man who encounters a woman rooted in her essence is not merely drawn to her, he is undone by her. She unravels the illusions he built around love, strips away the defenses he thought would protect him, and forces him to stand naked before his own soul. He cannot consume her, and this wounds his ego. Yet the wound is holy, for it awakens him to a truth he cannot silence: he does not want to own her, he wants to be worthy of her. This shift is the axis upon which longing turns into reverence. The archetype that stirs here is the alchemist. In ancient traditions, the alchemist sought to turn lead into gold, not only in metals but in the soul itself. In love, this process is mirrored in longing. The man, confronted with a woman who cannot be possessed, feels the dull weight of his own incompleteness. Yet instead of rejecting it, he begins to burn with the fire of transformation. She becomes the catalyst that awakens his own alchemy, the hunger to refine himself, to rise beyond the limits of his ego, to meet her with equal wholeness. His longing for her body deepens into longing for his own becoming, and in this way, she is unforgettable. But this transformation only unfolds when she herself refuses to abandon her sovereignty. If she softens into submission to soothe his fears, she robs him of the crucible he needs. If she plays the savior, she shields him from the very shadows that would have grown him. If she bends herself into his expectations, she dissolves the alchemy before it begins. Longing requires her steadfastness, her refusal to collapse. Not out of coldness, but out of love for truth itself. In her refusal, she teaches him that real intimacy is not escape from pain, but the courage to face it. And here the wisdom of the Stoics whispers again. Marcus Aurelius wrote that what stands in the way becomes the way. To a man, the woman who cannot be conquered is both the obstacle and the path. She blocks the route of his ego, yet opens the road of his soul. She denies him easy comfort, yet offers him a doorway into devotion. She is both limit and liberation, both the stone he stumbles upon and the mountain he must climb. And so his longing grows with each moment he fails to master her, because in failing to master her, he begins, at last, to master himself. Yet not every man will walk this path. Many will falter. Many will curse the flame because it burns. But the empowered woman does not chase those who turn away. She knows her role is not to convince but to embody. To be herself so fully that his own soul must choose, remain as he is, or rise into who he could become. This is why her presence lingers even after her absence. Men may forget the women who gave too quickly, but they never forget the woman who remained whole. Her essence echoes in their memory like a haunting, reminding them of the moment they glimpsed what they truly longed for and realized they were not yet ready. And you, standing in this truth, will feel the freedom it brings. No longer do you ask, what must I give to keep him? Instead, you ask, what must he rise into to keep me? This is not arrogance, it is alignment. It is the knowing that your worth is not measured in sacrifice, but in sovereignty. And in this knowing, you awaken a man's deepest longing, not because you bent yourself into his need, but because you refuse to betray your own soul. Longing, at its deepest, is not about pursuit but about awakening. The man who meets a sovereign woman is confronted with a truth that shakes his foundations: she does not need him. Her world is whole, her essence intact, her worth unquestioned. And in this realization, he feels both terror and wonder. Terror, because without her dependency he cannot lean on the illusion of control. Wonder, because her freedom makes her presence a gift rather than a possession. What he craves most is not her submission, but her choosing. He longs not to be her captor, but her counterpart. This longing endures because it is rooted in paradox. He knows he cannot consume her, and yet he is consumed by her. He knows he cannot own her, and yet she inhabits his thoughts like a secret flame. The unconscious recognizes what the ego resists, that her very independence, her refusal to collapse, is what keeps desire alive. She is like water, essential, life-giving, impossible to hold in clenched fists. The tighter he tries to grasp, the more she slips through, until he realizes the only way to be near her is to open his hands, to release control, to meet her with equal freedom. Jung's great insight was that love is not fusion, but individuation, the meeting of two complete selves who choose to walk together. The woman who embodies this truth transforms the very structure of relationship. She no longer bargains with her worth, no longer sacrifices her essence for the illusion of security. She knows that love without freedom is bondage, and longing without respect is hunger without nourishment. And so she waits, not passively, but powerfully, for the man who is ready to meet her at her depth. For him, her presence becomes not just desire, but destiny. And here the final truth is revealed: the longing he feels for her is not simply for her body, her beauty, or her affection. It is for the reflection of himself he sees when he is near her, the man he could be, the wholeness he could claim, the freedom he could embody. She is both mirror and mystery, both invitation and boundary. She teaches him, without words, that love is not about possession but about expansion. To be with her is to grow. To lose her is to be haunted by the growth he refused. For the woman, this is liberation. She no longer fears being left, because she knows she cannot truly be abandoned. She carries herself as the prize not because she plays games, but because she has become the embodiment of her own worth. She loves deeply, but she never loses herself in the giving. She walks beside a man, but never behind. She receives love, but she is never defined by it. And in this embodiment, she awakens not just his longing, but her own freedom. The story ends where it began, not with a woman chasing, not with a man conquering, but with two souls meeting in truth. His longing for her is eternal, because it is not satisfied by possession. Her power is eternal, because it is not diminished by his presence. Together they form a union not of dependency, but of choice. A union where love thrives because freedom is preserved. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.